how much is water a factor at all? I mean, I know down where we're at, we have a lot of water, but like, is that ever something that you consider as well for potentially holding a mature buck?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, yeah. I mean, if I've got a creek, a large creek in an area, but in the drainages I've got smaller pools of water, and I'm going to worry about those way more than I am the creek itself because I mean it's always there, but those little tucked away places are where a big buck's going to want to get even in the summertime. It's just that's just who they are. Is to not. I mean, I have put enough trail cameras out that even during the summer, the big bucks that I've gotten during the summertime, they may team up with a bachelor group and they may act like the bachelor group, but they're never with the bachelor group once. They will when they're in a feeding area, but when they're alone, they're in a totally different area than that younger bachelor group is. Like it's like they all join up and they'll go to a feeding area. But when they leave that feeding area, that larger buck is still soloing himself from them, and they'll move on. I've caught a lot of bachelor groups in feed areas that have a huge buck with it, and then I'll try to backtrack them or forward track them, and that big buck is not with them anymore, 120 yards, 300 yards away from the feeding area. So then it's like trying to find that big buck, and he's usually somewhere that doesn't make sense for them. Like they're wanting to stay in an area concentrated close to food. They may move a lot more, but he's trying to get tucked up into something to stay cool, and he didn't have to move far for a little bit of food, and he's got water.
I think a lot of times they're near the water. Oh, and when we talked, it's not like they're using it as like they need the water source like to drink. But you think like when we went to Indiana, the deer were bedded right on the edge of the water. Wasn't it PK that mentioned the back wall, having a back wall?
Back wall, that's what we were saying.
Yeah, I think, and you can apply that to a lot of different scenarios, not just water.
Now, I'll be honest with you, though. I mean, up there, I saw that a lot, but like back on the other area that I came from, this really kind of Appalachian, I didn't see that a whole lot there. That's why that was such a shock for me.
Right.
There in that area, like the Appalachian area of the mountains, the creeks are more crossing the creek. They're not bedding up on it. So it's like, I think if you're hunting those two different places, you really have to be adaptive to how they're doing.
Well, I mean, it's just like
both.
It's just like coming from where I set up all those trail cameras on that particular WMA, and then on another particular WMA that I hunt, they're using a lot more open cover than down there, from what I've seen.
Very true. That's why, to me, it's so tailored towards the habitat that maybe a listener or viewer is hunting, and how the strategy is going to change a little bit, because that's a really good point, Mike. Yeah. I mean, you could drive, like in Alabama, you could drive, 60, 80, 100 miles, and it is completely different worlds of like cover, vegetation type, terrain, topography, and how the deer necessarily uses them.
Yeah.
So
I would say in my one particular WMA, having a back wall, that's very beneficial to them there.
Yeah, I would say
I didn't necessarily notice it down there on that other one, but definitely it changes.
Just to also clarify that term, back wall, because it's been a long time since we talked about that, like with PK Doug White. But a back wall, for the listeners and viewers, Doug, who we had on, I don't remember his episode numbers, we can probably look up in a little bit, but he was talking about Florida, that water is a really good back wall. Just something or he talked about one situation down there. It was, I don't know if it was like some kind of mine. It was something on the property that nothing could come from, and the deer would bed their back up against it and kind of work away from it. And he said the water works exactly the same way, especially like deep water. They're not going to cross without some kind of pressure. So that's what we mean by talking about back wall. But yeah, no, again, I haven't seen that in a lot of places in Alabama. It's one of those things, I think, I associate more that back wall situation more so with some kind of deeper water, sloughs and stuff like that. Like, yeah, the deer can definitely go across it, but he's really doing it so he doesn't have to worry about what's behind him. It's more so focusing on what's in front of him, on where he's going to exit out of that bedding area. But that is a really good point.
And it may be like that particular thing. It may be like where the creek's bedding along them. It may be more of a Midwest thing. You think back to like THP, like years ago, when they were in that certain area and had come in by water. Like I don't know if they kayaked in or if they walked in by water, but they ended up jumping that big huge buck off his bed, and he went right down. Do you remember that one? He had all the trash in his hair, or in
Yeah, I
his,
remember in his
in his hair,
In his rack.
all the trash in his rack. Yeah,
I remember that.
yeah. I mean, I think it happens a decent amount.
Well, in that MSU study, when Bronson was going over some of those, that particular buck where he was showing all the movements and the beds and everything, a bunch of those beds were stacked up right there. There's that bend in the creek. There was a bunch right there, but then in other areas on the creek as well, he kind of seemed to gravitate towards that creek. But then he talked about another buck that we didn't look at his specific points, but he's like, this buck, it's like you couldn't make him go across that river. It was like a wall to him.
Yeah,
And it's just,
and I think that's similar to the Auburn GPS study that we looked over years ago. They'd use a ridge as like a natural zone, like, hey, this is my area and that is your area on the other side of that ridge.
Mm-hmm.
Like they'd go up and meet, but never would cross over, which was kind of unique.
But you're referencing Auburn GPS data right there, which we got our hands on, and we put it on maps, and we did videos on it and everything. Those videos are not on YouTube; they're on our Patreon account. But we were talking about that not long ago, where there was this one ridge where these two bucks they would come up to, and they would just neither of them ever crossed over that ridge. They'd go to the top of the ridge. They were never there at the same time, but they'd go to the top of that ridge, but they would never get on the other one's side, which was kind of interesting. Mm-hmm. So I do want to ask about also food sources in the summer. And, I know that y'all have scouted, Indiana here recently, so I know it's different up there because obviously there's agriculture. But both of you guys come from more of a big woods hunting background. So in the summer months, what do you find important from a food standpoint in that setting? Or are you really paying attention to that, or is it just 100% cover?
It's food. I mean, food too. I mean, me and him were talking about it coming over here, and I think me and you did a podcast on it maybe last year, kind of touching on the same thing, and it's finding that isolated, almost like going to the candy store type food source. That's a good place to start out. If you can find like right now,
late
July, you're about to start seeing the pokeweed. And I think everybody knows what that looks like if you look raised in the South and you hunt. It's that purple-looking plant that grows really, really tall and, just looks like a tree, basically. But that's going to get really super popular right now, the next month and a half. So finding pockets of those in that thick cover, like maybe maybe you've had blowdown or something in some pine thickets or something like that, you can find that pokeweed. If you're a couple months or say a couple weeks ahead, the blackberries, things like that. If you can find blueberries, any kind of just unique food source, I'm going to focus on those as well. But certainly coming into the time of year we are right now, the pokeweed is going to be huge, and ragweed.
What about things like maybe some early dropping persimmons or muscadines? Or anything like that?
If you can find them, Yeah.
On this one particular place, like I've had multiple cameras on persimmon trees, and I've never gotten a deer on them.
Really?
Yeah. I don't know why. Because in South Alabama, I've been to places and they'll hit them like white on rice. I mean, they're on them like white on rice, but not up there.
What about brown rice?
Possibly. I don't know.
Yeah, I've actually seen the same thing around here, where I've never had good luck on persimmons for cameras at least, because they're done by the time our bow season comes in. But we'll talk to specifically guys in Arkansas and even North Georgia. I've had some North Georgia guys talk about finding persimmon trees like up in the mountains and it being really good. But I'd like never have had good luck
on my farm. I mean, it's covered in persimmon trees, and you can put a camera there, and there'll be a deer there every hour. But
so
the ones that are like I find out in the woods that are just alone, like in an old house place. Usually, a lot of times you'll find old house places. They'll have a couple persimmon trees there. Put a camera on them, useless. But it's just I think it depends on I think persimmons are just like a crop. Like if they don't have good soil, like I think that has a lot to do with it. So if you got one sitting out in the middle of the woods, you're probably not going to taste as good as that one that's along the creek bank, got good rich soil to draw from.
Yeah.
Just it's got to be that. I can't think of any other reason. It's just the flavor is just not the same.
Yeah, we find them too all the time where those persimmons hold really late, and you'll find a persimmon tree in December that's loaded, and you can see them up there. I mean, because they stick out, they look like Christmas ornaments hanging off the tree. And I've never had any. I've actually tried to hunt those before, and I've never had any luck with them. And last year I kind of theorized that it's because I went up last year and I ate a persimmon off the tree, and the first bite was fine, and the second bite. I mean, have you ever bitten to a raw persimmon or unripe? It's rough.
Yeah.
It is rough. It tastes like carpet burn on the inside of your mouth.
It's like drinking an IPA.
Well, so like it's like drinking an IPA. Like half that persimmon, and these are even ones on the ground that have fallen. It's like half of it just doesn't ripen for some reason.
Yeah.
So I wonder if the deer don't like them for that because they get a bite of it and it's just half of it's bad.
I noticed the ones out. Like I found some too out here in the place we're hunting now, and the ground is covered with them. Mm-hmm. The squirrels are not even eating them.
Yeah.
So if the squirrels are not eating them,
One thing my dad
you're
always
not gonna have a
said,
deer
which
eating
I
it,
don't know if it's true or not, but he always said that after the first frost, that they become a lot more palatable because of a change in the sugar content or something like that. Maybe they become more sweet.
Some of the best ones I ever had were up in Arkansas when I used to live there, and they would hold late, and we would get a frost like sometime in October, like early October, and you go and eat them, and it was unreal, like how good they were. But it's like I've never seen any hold that long down here.
Yeah.
So I mean, I think that's very regionally specific as well, and kind of like where it's located at and how long they're going to hold for. But not to get off the food tree or the feed tree food source aspect. Well, one other thing I think that would be super beneficial, and this kind of gets down to like episode we did with Alan Summerford and Kyle Lieberg when they came down to the farm, is like all your native browse species that like most people don't know of. Like there's so many different natural like native legumes, and that was something we found on our farm, my uncle's farm, in a lot of spots where it was just like, I mean, it was knee high, like 5 different species of legumes in like a 1 acre area that like he didn't have to plant, and the deer were wearing them out. And it's like that's one of those things that like I know what they look like now. I don't remember all the names of them. So it's like if you find like big patches where you have like that low growth greenery, and it's thigh high or shorter, you can literally walk through. This is something that Paul Pater's talked about a bunch when he's been on the podcast. Like looking at those browse lines, like in the woods, and finding where like you can actually see the tops of all these plants being nipped off. And like one thing we learned a couple of years ago when you and me put a camera out on some mineral stumps and some clear cuts where they're growing back, and the deer had them eaten down like a little beach ball.
Yeah.
I mean, that's something else. Like if you have some of those on a place where the clear cuts, they cut it last winter, it's growing up this year, and it's like, they'll be thigh high, and the deer will literally eat the whole top of that stump, and all the new little shoots come out. Like it's crazy.
Yep. Yeah, there was a lot of that, especially down there in that cutover.